Conscious Conversations. Um, it's February 17th, 2021. And tonight our conscious conversation is with Unity member Pam Pence. Pam has a very interesting background, and she's going to talk to us a little about her spiritual journey, as well as her experience in teaching yoga, various lineages and types of yoga, and her current project that she's become very passionate about since COVID started and changed the course of her life, as it has for so many people. We're also going to talk to her about the Sunday morning book study class that's been going on for quite a long while, a number of years. And she's thinking of changing the title to Book Experience Class. And after you hear what she has to say, I think you'll understand why she's thinking of making that change. But before we get to that, we'll have our poem for tonight, which is a poem called Wind Will Blow It All Away. Margaret of Navarre, who was a 16th century queen, one of the founders of the French Renaissance. We know a lot about the Italian Renaissance, not so much about the French Renaissance, although Leonardo da Vinci spent some time with her in her court, in her salon. In many ways, she was considered the first modern woman of France. She was considered kind and charitable and actually got involved in financing education for needy students. So she was way ahead of her time in terms of her religious and social awareness. So I think you'll see from this poem that she also had a great deal of insight about things that we would consider spiritual. So the poem is called Wind Will Blow It All Away. If someone insults you, go on with light heart. If they all do it, pay no heed to what they say. There's no new art in talk of that kind. Wind will blow it all away. If someone praises devotion, implying, of course, it's okay, but says, of course, the works of the law are much greater. It's weird dogma. Pass by, don't bother. Wind will blow it all away. And if they next, to make you less open to God, say to flatter you that you are truly great, turn your back to talk of that sort. Wind will blow it all away. And if the world itself should come, money, castles, great sweets in its hand, just say, I have enough today. For worldly things return when they came. Wind will blow it all away. And if people name a place, not God's, where all sorrow will be settled, all be saved, they have an evil aim. Be strong, say no to these odd people. Wind will blow it all away. So Margaret of Navarre was ahead of her time in terms of identifying the temptations of the world and the false prophets of the works of the law versus the good works of devotion. So let's have our prayer, and I want to credit the amazing Paulette Pipe, Touching the Stillness Ministries. Her prayers are just of an extra special variety. Whatever my current circumstances or conditions, I believe I have within me what it takes to create and live a life that matters. After all, am I not a divine being navigating my way through this human experience? Yes, I am. I am a point of light. I am a point of light, and with changed perspectives and honed spiritual tools, I dauntlessly create a love-infused life that matters. And so it is. And as we say every week, prayer changes everything because it changes us. I am a point of light. It's wonderful to remember. I am a point of light. And so let's have a song now from Faith Rivera before we have our conscious conversation.
Power of now is always present, nowhere to be than where you are. The power of now flows oh so gracefully. The power of now is always perfect, nothing to be than who you are. The power of now flows oh so easily. Be willing to let go of everything you think you need to know. Oh, be strong enough to let go of everything you think you need to control. For everything goes away. Let everything wash away. The power of love. The power of now is ever flowing, connecting the soul to the world. The power of now unfolds so peacefully. Be willing to let go of everything you think you need to know. Oh, be strong enough to let go of everything you think you need to control. For everything goes away. Let everything wash away. The power of now.
Thank you, Faith. And so now I want to introduce, many of you know Pam. Pam was our board president for quite a while, a couple of years. And we're just catching up with her a little to see what she's doing now. So Pam Pence, thank you for being with us tonight on Conscious Conversations. And I have, three main things I want to talk to you about. First being your own spiritual journey, which, we talk at Unity about not focusing on our story. And I think our stories are interesting a lot of
Right.
it. And I don't really know your story. I know that you were in business at one point, some aspect of business. And I also know that you taught yoga at the VA hospital up in Long Beach, and that's really all I know. So tell us a little about what happened.
Okay, well, thank you, Mary Jean, for inviting me to be here tonight.
Mhm.
So my spiritual journey, I was actually born into a Lutheran church and followed that practice very diligently through marriage. And then as a young adult, I started wondering about things that were the typical Christian belief, which is if you don't believe in Jesus, you go to hell. And I'm thinking about all the people that have never heard of Jesus and just wondering about how does that relate to a loving God. And so I just started, questioning. And so we ended up moving away from the Lutheran church into nothing for a while. And then my husband and I, Rod, we had kids. And when they were 2 and 6 years old, I thought, I want them to have the same kind of at least basic understanding of the Christian faith. And so I went to the Yellow Pages, which still existed back then.
Right. Your kids are pretty grown up now, aren't they?
What's that?
Your kids are pretty grown up now, aren't they?
22 and 26, yeah.
Wow.
22 and 26, yeah. And so interestingly, we now have 3 generations living in my house right now.
Wow.
But so I scanned the Yellow Pages looking for something that was alluding to kind of Christian base, but open-minded. And so I found Unity in those Yellow Pages, called you guys up, and whoever I talked to said enough to entice me to come. And I've been there I was there ever since.
Wow.
And so again, my oldest son was 6 and he's 26, so that's 20 years.
Yeah. And your journey, and I don't know much about Lutheranism except my sense of it is it's pretty dark in terms of people going to hell and that sort of stuff. And so that was a big switch, but then you went even further than that. And tell me how you got into your yoga practice.
Well, actually, I got into yoga because I was in chronic pain.
Oh.
And I tried chiropractic, I tried PT, I tried all these things and they didn't work. So this yoga thing's supposed to help, so I'll give it a try. And I took a yoga class at the local Tustin Senior Citizen Center, and I loved it. I was working out with a trainer 3 days a week. I was in top physical shape. When I went to that yoga class, she kind of whipped my butt. I was just exhausted. I couldn't believe what I couldn't do. And so I thought there's something here. So I came into yoga strictly from a physical perspective. And over time, and then I decided a year in that I'd become a yoga teacher. And so I started studying the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and some of the other philosophy. And I started to get introduced to Buddhism through the process. And so slowly I started widening my perspectives and leaving behind the traditional Christian dogma. And yes, by the way, Lutheranism is very close to Catholicism. lots of guilt.
Yeah. Yes,
So,
yes.
so I went through the yoga. I took many yoga training, and each time I took a little bit of a different tact because I'm curious and like to be exposed to different things. So I took a lot of different types of yoga training, and in that process, when I first came to Unity, I mostly was in the Sunday school classes, youth and family ministry with my kids. So I didn't actually get out of there until probably, I don't know, my older son was 10. So 4 or 5 years into it, I actually went into the church. And then I started attending Marge's classes. And I remember my perspectives being blown wide open when she talked about what? Jesus is not literally the way, the truth, and the life. What? I remember, like, what are you talking about? So I did a lot of growing at Unity.
So in yoga, like most people, I mean, well, like I'm going to say in my exposure, I've done a few yoga classes and, have kind of dabbled in and out of it. Tell us from a spiritual perspective, because obviously you went into it because you had chronic pain, and I'm going to assume that yoga helped. Is that right?
Very much so.
Very much. So it helped, but then you said you started studying the Yoga Sutras and all this other. Can you explain? Because I don't think a lot of people understand the connection between why yoga is a spiritual practice.
Mm. So yoga can be a spiritual practice, and it can just be another form of going to the gym. It really depends on what you are open to and what you're exposed to. But yoga has an entire philosophy of life. In fact, yoga is a philosophy of life. It's a way of living, and it has its own version of the 10 Commandments. Don't lie, don't steal, keep yourself clean, search out your version of who God is. So so there's that structure there. And then I also was very curious because I did come to yoga from a physical perspective, and people would talk about, oh, when I was in yoga, I had this spiritual experience and my heart opened, and I'm going, what? I mean, I did not connect to that at all. That was not my experience. But I heard it, so I was curious. So I kept looking for that. And one of the trainings I did was Phoenix Rising Yoga Therapy. And that particular lineage of yoga is tantric. And it's very much about being present to what's going on inside you as you're doing the yoga. The postures are just a way to become acquainted with your body. And so that's when I started to have some emotional experiences on the mat, but for me, they were only in a yoga therapy context, not in a general class. And I have seen it happen where people are just at that point where if they've lived their whole life kind of curled in because they've been protecting themselves, and then you go to a yoga class and they ask you to open up your arms and open up your chest, it's like, wow, it's a totally different way to be in your body. So and as you mentioned, I taught yoga at the VA in Long Beach, and I worked with a lot of women with military sexual trauma, and I saw a lot of openings and weeping on the mat.
So in that sense, it's a healing practice.
Yes.
But also, we know the only way out is through. So
yes.
there's a lot of pain associated with getting to that healing.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked a little about various lineages and various types of yoga. Are there, most of us are familiar with, I believe, hatha yoga, which are the kind taught at most of the yoga studios around, and then the Bikram yoga, and then of course that hot yoga, which when I first heard about it, I thought, oh, that just sounds dreadful. And I know people that love it, that talk about, releasing all the toxins and all this. So I had no idea there were this many different kinds of yoga. And how do they differ? Do they differ in terms of the poses, or some of them don't do poses? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, just as a basis, it's kind of interesting to know the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I believe it's 101, but I might be a little rusty on that. Actual sutras in this text. And of those 101, or whatever number it is, there are 3 that talk about postures, just 3.
Okay.
The rest of the text talks about meditation, about ways to increase your capacity to be at one with the one, God, whatever name you want to call it. And then another chapter of the sutras talks a lot about special powers that you can create, clairvoyance and what have you. So anyway, so the physical piece of yoga is actually very small, but when you bring it to America, that was the entry point.
Right.
Nobody wanted to listen to a Hindu talk about his religion or her religion. Mostly he, the first yogis were pretty much all men. So so the different types of yogas, most of I haven't seen one that doesn't work with physical postures, because as I just explained, putting your body in a different posture than you're used to can make major shifts in your perspective and how you feel in your body. Some of them focus a lot more on the breath than others. Some of them focus on a lot of mudras, hand positions.
Mm-hmm.
Phoenix Rising Yoga Therapy really focuses on the emotional qualities while you're doing the poses. Others, Iyengar Yoga, for example, is mostly about standing in one posture for a while and holding it and noticing the various nuances that are going on. Others are more that you flow from one posture to the other and you use your breath to keep yourself moderated. So they all have a slightly different bent.
Well, it seems like I thought it's interesting what you said about bringing it to America, because I'm sure we have put, our type of consumer culture to it. And I never thought of yoga as a religion, but it sounds like there are aspects of religion that are part of it, lists of do's and don'ts and
Yep.
Ways of being that correspond a lot to a religious path. And I'm sure most people, I don't know, but most people going to it, because your story about being in shape and then going there and discovering, wow, this is really, now I don't know, that may have been a very difficult class that you started out with, but
no. Why it kicked my butt was because I was in physical shape as far as strength. But as far as flexibility, I was very inflexible. And so you start doing these yoga poses and I can't do it because my muscles are so tight, which is why I was in such pain.
Oh, really?
Which is one of the reasons it helps so much, because it loosened up the muscle tissue.
And that tightness, when you think about, I don't know what your life was like at that point, but I know when I've had those kind of things of, tight muscles, it's just a defensive sort of posture, I guess you would say, and sitting all day, or, our culture in general, just, and you see people in India, for example, sitting, cross-legged or squatting or whatever. We never do that kind of thing, right?
Right. Yeah. Yoga is really designed for a Indian body. So unless you work on it for a very long time, a Western body doesn't do it easily for the reasons that you just.
Right. But yet you've seen it and used it as a healing modality. And you mentioned to me earlier that you kind of had to sell this idea to the VA. Is that right?
Yeah. There were no yoga classes in the VA. There had been people who had come by and taught a class or two, and then they kind of disappeared. I found that out later. But I went, this is my typical fashion. This is how I do things. I got a premonition that this is where I should be practicing yoga. I had been doing youth yoga. I'd been doing after school yoga, and it really wasn't resonating with me. And I saw a billboard one time, and there was a man in, I think, full Marine uniform, and I started to cry.
Oh.
And I thought, so I grew up in a military family. My dad was 20 years retired from the Navy.
Okay.
So that's when I decided, okay, that's where I need to go, because I was searching for where should I practice. So I went to VA and I looked up the departments that they had, and then I actually created a brochure, and I went through the VA and dropped off my brochure at the departments, and I basically cold called them. And then I called them back and said, hey, I'd like to come in. I'd like to work with the veterans. And I happened to have, not happened to, the synchronicity was that the week that I went to VA, the Women's Mental Health Center had just lost their dance teacher that was part of their military sexual trauma recovery program. They had movement as part of that program. And so when she got my brochure, and she also was a yogi, so she called me up.
Oh, right.
And within a couple of weeks, I was teaching yoga as a volunteer. And I taught there as a volunteer almost full-time, not full-time, half-time, for about 2 years. And I covered the gamut from the homeless program, the substance abuse program, the women's military, the senior long-term care facility, etc. So I tried them all on, and really resonated and felt comfortable with the Women's Mental Health Center, and that began to grow, and I took on private patients there. And so I spent most of my time there. And then the primary care department also was talking to the person who had hired me, and they wanted somebody to teach yoga for pain management. And I knew all about that.
Oh,
So,
really? Yes, because you lived it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I started teaching about 8 classes a week there as well. And at that point I was paid. So first yoga teacher on payroll in VA, and the reason I did it is I knew it was a need, and somebody had to do it. Somebody had to break the ice and just get in there and make it happen. So I was really happy to do it. It was extremely rewarding. Yeah. So I'll fast forward, if you like, into more current. So when COVID hit in February, March, I taught in the hospital, in the conference room, and in the Women's Mental Health Center. So they wanted the hospital to be free of anything that wasn't necessary because of COVID. So the yoga program was put on hold. And so all of a sudden, I found myself without a job to go to every day. And I also rolled off the board at that time, and that was taking a lot of my time. So these two things that took almost all my time disappeared overnight. And so I just sat down and said, okay, well, this is pretty interesting that it all went away at one time. So what does this mean for me? What's here? I don't know how I got the book, but I read Terry Patton's New Republic of the Heart. And in that book, he talks about the existential crisis of our ecology on Earth, and was building a spiritual community that wanted to support the Earth in a spiritual way as well as in practical ways. And so he has an organization called a New Republic of the Heart, and I joined that. And I overnight became aware of our crisis. I had my head in the sand. I was busy working, wasn't paying attention. I looked up and go, oh my gosh. And so after I read the book, I said, okay, well, what's mine to do here? And for whatever reason, overpopulation of the human race came to mind. And I know that's a very sticky subject, so I try to convince myself that no, that's not really what I'm supposed to be doing. That's way too hard. It's very controversial, but I couldn't shake it. It was there. And so since March, I've read I don't know how many books, listened to how many podcasts, and I'm leading a small team now that is working on getting the word out that we can lovingly, with free choice, reduce our birth rate across the world in all countries, reduce the size of the human population in a loving way over the next 80 years, and get to a more sustainable place. And so that's what I'm spending most of my time doing right now. And I'm also hosting a discussion group about how do you run projects in a very present, open way, which is very different from, you mentioned I was in business, I was in accounting, I ran projects for mergers and acquisitions, and it was all about deadlines and get this done, and I don't care who gets what happens to who, just get it done. And which is one of the reasons I left the corporate world. But so this group that I'm running, we're sitting with how do you do projects in a loving way when you're really present and you're letting the divine show you where to go, like what is emerging, what wants our attention. Mm-hmm. So that's
like you've been doing with even hearing this. It reminds me of, this had to be 1970. There was a book called The Population Bomb.
Yep.
That came out. Ehrlich, maybe?
Yep, Paul Ehrlich.
Yeah. Anyway, that book, at the time, everyone was reading that book. I think I was in college, and it was like the book. And what was that, 50 years ago? And we're still, yeah. And even at the time, it was somewhat controversial, but there was always a feeling of, at least this is the way I remember it, well, in other parts of the world, they have that problem, but we've got plenty of room here, not taking into account his point of, we're each consuming a lot. Isn't it true that in America we consume a lot of the world's resources?
Yes. The statistics are, if everyone on the earth consumed the way Americans do, we would need 5 Earths.
Wow.
If everyone consumed like an average French person, we'd need 3 Earths. And then it goes down from there. And if everyone were to live, if the whole population were to live sustainably, we would all have to live at $7,000 or less a year in order for all of us to live at that level. Mm. So it's not a distribution issue. There's just too many of us consuming the way we do.
Right.
And it's actually more important for developed countries to reduce the size of their population through birth rates because we consume so much.
Yes.
If you have 5 kids in the Sudan, they're not going to make nearly as impact as 1 child in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Well, it's definitely a way to look at, and I mean, we pointed at this problem 50 years ago, and now I don't know, it's like it takes us a long time to sort of wake up, I guess, but and I guess I want to switch subjects a little because I do want to talk about your Sunday morning book study class, mm-hmm. which has been going on for a long time. And I don't remember who was leading it before you, but we're going back years now. You've been leading it for quite a number of years, right?
Yeah, I would guess it started around 20 years ago.
20.
It may not be exactly that, but it started with Lois Ryan. Mm-hmm. And she had someone else who used to teach with her, and that person left. And I don't know if there's one or two others, but eventually Paul Cruz was teaching with her on Sunday morning. And that's when I started, when Paul and Lois were teaching together. And when Lois passed, then Paul was looking for another co-host, so he invited me to hold that space with him. And then he had, personal reasons for leaving, and so when he left, then I started taking management of the space. And no one in particular has wanted to co-host it on an ongoing basis. So I generally hold the space, but the way I do it is it's not me running the group. Yes, I started, I end it, but I hold it very lightly. So when I'm not there, then there's someone else that picks it up, so we don't miss any Sundays. So
Now,
we have studied books of the Bible. We've studied Heart Math, Lessons in Truth by Cody, a couple of Eckhart Tolle books, Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul. We've done a couple Goldsmith books, and right now we're wrapping up The Eye of the Storm, which was written by Gary Simmons.
and you've been on that book for over a year, isn't that right?
Yes.
Okay, so the reason I bring that up is, I think of a book study group and I think of, okay, this month our book is whatever, and everybody comes together and says, well, I liked it or I didn't like it or whatever. So this is different. This is different than that. And maybe you can sort of explain a little of when you take a year, at least a year you've been on that book, and delve into it like that. Tell me what you do that keeps you on that one thing for a year.
Well, it might give an indication that I'm thinking of changing the name to the book experience.
Oh, okay.
So when we study a book, we actually read the book in the class.
So no, you don't read it at home. You read it.
No, we read it together in class, and
okay.
This is pulling from my yogic traditions. It's pulling from my meditation teaching. It's pulling from some we space practices that I've been involved in. I'm actively involved in 4 different we space practices. So I'm pulling from all of those. So when we read the book, for example, we'll read a subsection or even less at a time. And I'll invite everyone to let go of their thinking mind and be really open in their heart space. Perhaps I might take them into that heart space, or as a beginning meditation, or a lot of them are pretty experienced, so sometimes you just go there. And then we read the book, and the invitation is to listen to what is resonating in you as you hear the words. So it's not about understanding it mentally, but rather what is vibrationally, energetically am I picking up here? And so then we have a lot of silence in the group. So after we read it, we just sit in silence for a while and just notice what's percolating. And then the space is open to share if anyone wants to. And it's an invitation to not, come from the head and analyze it, but rather, what did you experience? What emotions did you feel? Memories, thoughts for sure. What came up for you when you were reading this book? We normally then speak about our own personal experiences with the material. When did we not show up in the way that the book is illustrating? When did we show up in that way? Contrast what those 2 ways feel like when you show up or don't show up in the way the book is shedding light on. So it moves slowly because it's very experiential. And lots of silence, space between speakers. So what each person says has a chance to percolate.
So I guess, I mean, all that takes more time, right, than
Mhm.
just the typical uh, book study, discussion. Because it sounds like you have some sharing, but it's not discussion like I think of discussion.
Mhm.
And there's no one saying, well, I disagree with you, because it's not like that. It's about experiencing the material.
Right, and it's the perspective is that every person has their own response to it, and whatever they say stands as a whole and complete sharing. It doesn't need to be discussed or analyzed. It is what it is. And someone might share next that has something to do with that. It might be very different from that. But, the usual don't cross talk kind of thing,
Right.
we discourage that. So whatever anyone wants to share, we don't say, yeah, well, I agree with that. Or it's just, here is my experience with this material. And then we move on to the next person, whoever feels like they want to share.
So there are books that I would guess would lend themselves better than others to that process. But do you think, have you had situations where certain books were better at this than others, or have most of the books sort of filled the bill?
Well, this way that I'm describing is something that I've introduced over the last 2 years as I've become more aware of we space practices. And what I mean by that, in case someone listening doesn't know what that I mean by that, is that there's you, there's me, and then there's the space between us that is created because we're here together. And that space is what I'm looking to encourage people to experience. So it's not only what did you experience, what did I experience, but what are we feeling? Are you feeling the divine in this? Are you feeling a heaviness in the whole group? Do you feel the whole group is lifted up? So there's the opportunity to practice being aware of what's in between us. And as I said, I've only been doing that for the last couple of years. So I would say definitely something like a Joel Goldsmith book would not lend itself necessarily as much to that, or and I suppose I definitely wouldn't use this with a Cynthia Bourgeault book, which is very heavy, dense. Although her newest book, there are parts of it that you could take into that kind of experience, but you'd want to look at a book that would more support that as opposed to only parts of it. So we are just about done with Eye of the Storm. In fact, I haven't been able to go last week and tomorrow. So who knows, they might wrap it up tomorrow. But so we're looking at maybe Ade Shanti's End of the World. These are just my suggestions, and it's the group's discussion that will determine what we end up doing. Because of the activist work that I'm doing, I'm kind of curious about a book, probably from Richard Rohr, about spiritual activism. Maybe something from, what's the man's name who's been to Unity many times, who's an spiritual activist?
Andrew Harvey.
Yes, Andrew Harvey. Maybe one of his books. I don't know. And
His
I'm also
books are also quite long, but he's definitely all about spiritual activism and yeah. So
and that of course is my interest. That doesn't necessarily mean other people in the group are interested in that. So and also Richard Rohr's The Universal Christ.
Yes.
He came out with a guidebook, so I thought perhaps that would lend itself well.
Yeah. Well, I like the idea of what you're describing as experiencing, and what you mentioned about this, whatever it is you read, relating it to yourself, relating it to where you fell short, relating it to where you felt like you embodied that, whatever. Um, I think that has a lot of value, and I think your synthesis of these yoga traditions, lineages, that must be something you're called to, is doing this kind of synthesis of different parts of things. And I'm guessing that you will also bring that to your uh, population work, lowering the population, having people be aware that, that's something that would really, go a long way toward alleviating. Is it alleviating the I don't know, the sense that the world's resources are being used up too quickly and we're going to run out of resources? Um, I'm sure there's a lot to it, that the earth is being damaged by this.
Yes, it's basically Paul Ehrlich's material that didn't come to fruition because of the capacity to use oil to run tractors, to run huge farm machinery that was able to get a lot more yield out of the land. It didn't happen because of discovery of pesticides and fertilizers. So those three things in particular, as I remember it, have really forestalled what Paul Ehrlich was seeing coming.
The idea is there's plenty of food.
Right.
Okay.
But the food is only one piece.
Okay.
As probably most people are hearing, the bees are under
Yeah.
are being decimated in Japan. It's either Japan or China, I can't remember which. They are hand pollinizing apple trees now because the bees aren't there anymore. So it's that the oceans are being acidified because of what we're dumping in them, the deforestation of forests. They become deserts. They also aren't there to be the sink that soaks up the CO2. It's the ice caps that are melting that are raising the water level. So there are already refugees from islands who can't inhabit the islands they were living on because of the water rising. It's already happening.
Right.
So all of those, the size of the human population impact, every single one of them. So if we can, again, lovingly, not forcefully, with free choice, because people are educated about the problem, we reduce our family sizes over the next 30, 40 years, we can get down to a smaller number that's more manageable, because obviously all of those problems will be easier to solve with less people contributing to them.
So just listening to you, it's like you've gone from, this is what I hear, you've gone from this fairly traditional religious practice, business life, whatever, to, through the whole journey to, spiritual activism. And that's, I know Andrew Harvey would just jump for joy on hearing this story, because that's exactly the kind of story that he wants us all to have. Is, my memory is when he would speak about this, it was, whatever it is that calls to you, everybody's going to have a different thing that speaks to them. This overpopulation is the thing that spoke to you. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that you've taken the spiritual journey, and I think most of us recognize that when your ego is involved in, and we all have an ego, right?
Sure.
But when your ego is the thing that says, well, I'm going to care about the bees, but I'm doing it from this egoic standpoint, it's much more effective if it's you've had the spiritual journey, just like Richard Rohr, the Center for Action and Contemplation. it's a both and, right?
Yes.
You don't just do one, but you do both. Um,
Yeah, the point that his whole organization is built on is that you're not an effective activist if you're coming from anger, from illiteracy, from old beliefs that aren't really checked out. You have to be an informed person that's coming from love. We want to have less children in the world because their the perspective of their life going forward, if we keep on the same business as usual, is this going to be very dire.
yeah,
And how dire is up for discussion, but the fact that things are already collapsing, it's coming. And so, first of all, why bring a child into that? And secondly, why bring a lot of children into that just makes the problem so much harder to resolve? And it's a lot easier to speak to that when I'm coming as a mom. I love my kids. If I were to do it over again and I knew what I know now, I wouldn't have two children. I might have one, but coming from the love of Earth, the love of the animals, the whole biosphere, it's not. Here's the piece that is hard. Here's the spiritual practice: is to continually come from love and not fear, to check that fear, to see it, to work through it, to remember that everything is in divine order and timing. I don't need to get worried. I'm not in charge anyway. I'm not in control. I'm just doing my piece that I feel I'm called to do. And so that spiritual perspective makes it so much lighter to do the work than if I feel like I have to reduce the population of the world. That
right.
would be so daunting. But I'm a spokesperson. I'm doing what I can. I know God's got us. And so I don't need to worry.
Well, and on the other hand, though, you are doing it. You're not,
Yes.
um, sometimes on the spiritual path, people can become ungrounded and say, well, it's all in divine order, it's all fine. And you're saying, and it's mine to do.
Yes.
And I think that's what's a really important distinction between just, you know, waiting for God to, and sometimes God's waiting for you, right? So in your case,
Absolutely.
God doesn't have to wait for you because you're out there doing it. So, well, thank you, Pam. That was great. And did you have something else you wanted to say?
Just on that spiritual piece, and that is that um, the other piece of the spiritual practice that I feel is really important is to stay open to where am I being led next? Is it to organize this? Is it to do that? And obviously, it's not always clear. We all have been there where you're in the liminal space and you don't know where to go. And so that's the time of exercising your spiritual trust and opening all of your senses to see where are things going. That's a really, really big piece of it too.
And you seem to do exceptionally well with filling that empty space because you have to. Well, you do. I mean, you're always reinventing yourself and finding some new thing to, and gosh, it's only been a year, not even a year since COVID, and you've already got your next thing going and you're knee deep in it. So
Yeah,
I appreciate it though.
thank you. My mom moved in November with us. She's 89. And boy, if I don't have traits of hers that I didn't notice really until she moved in. And what you just described is one of my mother's traits. And I didn't really notice it, but she is busy no matter what.
Really?
So
Okay.
that was just really interesting to really take that in.
Yeah. Well, you've had things that have been very different in the last year, but
That's for sure.
it sounds like you're moving forward, and I'm sure you're accepting new members into the book study group, correct?
Always.
So when you start your new book, whatever it ends up being, we'll put out an announcement and new people can come in because you're meeting on Zoom. I just want to stress that it's not
Yes.
in person. And we'll be again someday, but not for right now. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we meet on Zoom, and all of these things that are experiential happen in the Zoom room, and it's really very effective.
In the Zoom space or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's good to hear. Well, thank you, Pam. It was
Thank you.
really good to talk with you about all this and um, all of your interesting things that are going on in your life. So thank you.
Thanks for inviting me, and I say God's blessing to you and all of Unity of Tustin.
Thank you so much, Pam. It's interesting to hear how someone converts their spiritual life into action, the things that call to them to take action in the world. So, taking action in the world also involves supporting and contributing to your spiritual source, which is Unity of Tustin for so many of us. There are a variety of ways to give. You can go to the website and make a donation or drop off your donation at church. Even some people even mail their donation. Whatever works for you. We appreciate all the gifts that enable us to do our work at Unity of Tustin. So let's say one of the most important affirmative prayers about giving that we have. Divine love as me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. And now, before we close tonight, I'd like us to say what I consider the greatest affirmative prayer of unity, the prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Thank you for being with me tonight on Conscious Conversations, and I hope you plan to join me next week. Good night.
Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in to the deepest kind of love, to the sweetest kind of life. Get ready, my soul. Everything I've ever done, everything I've ever seen, everything I've lost or won, everything I've ever dreamed has brought me here to the present moment, here to a new beginning, here, and I'm seeing life so clearly now. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in to the deepest kind of love, to the sweetest kind of life. Get ready, my soul. 'Cause here I go, deeper than I've ever been before. Here I go, closer to my sacred source. Here I go, deeper than I've ever been before. Here I go, closer to my sacred source. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in. Get ready, my soul. I'm diving in into the deepest kind of love, into the sweetest kind of life. Get ready, my soul. Get ready, my soul.